Hi everyone. I wanted to come online to talk about the wider implications of the Brianna Ghey situation. Brianna Ghey was a 16-year-old girl who was recently stabbed to death by a group of 15-year-old boys in broad daylight. And I wanted to talk about the wider conversation around transphobia and around the disquiet of cisgendered people, or people who don't want to be called cis. So I wanted to kind of encapsulate all of everything that I was gonna say. Now, not being trans, I don't have an insider view of what it is to be a trans person. I can't speak to the experiences of trans people, but what I'm about to do is explore both sides of the argument from my own perspective based on what I've witnessed. So, on the one hand, I can understand how women, or cisgendered women, or women who don't want to be called cisgendered, I can understand why they may feel maligned by the language that seems to be present with the trans community. I do think the outrage partially comes from ignorance, because they don't necessarily understand how the trans community relate to the wider world around them. But I can understand why cisgendered women feel put out by, how they're represented or how they're spoken about. And I think the reason why is that, let's be real, there are narcissistic people in all groups. And then there are people within the trans community, and especially trans women, who are inherently misogynistic in spite of the fact that they've transitioned into their real gender. There are still trans women who are highly misogynistic and who want to come into cis spaces and tell cis women who they are. The problem with that is that what happens when people on the other side of the equation, who are determined not to understand trans people, who are determined to be narrow-minded about trans people, what they will do is they will take examples of trans people who are clearly misogynist, clearly narcissistic, clearly want the whole world to revolve around themselves. Like I said, they exist in every group. So people on this side will take those types of trans people as an example, when the truth of the matter is, the large percentage of trans people are not like this. They're not seeking to take my space as a woman. They're not seeking to do that. They're not trying to do that. But because it's the narcissists who have the louder voices, and it's because it's the narcissists who are the ones who are highlighted, it's the predators, it's the people who use a trans identity in order to get away with crimes. I ain't naming no names, but I think you know who I'm talking about. So because the other side of the equation are using these types of trans people to make their argument, it kind of askews the whole picture of trans people. So whilst I have a right as a cisgendered woman to say, you know what, I'm a cisgendered woman and I don't want my experiences to be taken away from me, what we have to understand is that where our perspective comes from is the intellectual disingenuousness that panders to our anger without examining our anger. And the consequence of that is that we've got a small minority of group it's like we've got a small minority of people in the first place that are judged by an even smaller minority within that group. So we've got a small group of people, and they're being judged by an even smaller group of people who are not good human beings. And so, like, when we get into that, it's no wonder that trans people continuously find themselves in danger over and over again. It's not because of their own antics or their own behavior. It's not because of anything to do with that. It's to do with the fact that narcissists and people who are dark-minded are used as examples of a whole community. And then when our anger or our misgivings about how we feel about cisgendered women comes into the equation, instead of exploring where that anger comes from, and instead of examining the nuance of where that anger comes from, instead it's just like, I'm a woman. Like, bitch, I get it. I get it. I'm a woman too. But the thing is that our anger is being pandered to. It's not being examined. It's not being questioned. We are not educating ourselves on the way trans men express themselves. We're not educating ourselves on how misogyny plays a part throughout our society. And make no mistake, misogyny is exactly what leads every form of bigotry. Misogyny is behind racism. Misogyny is behind queerphobia. Misogyny is definitely behind transphobia, because all of it is revolved around fear of being submissive and fucking gay panic. It's all revolved around that. So misogyny is basically the fucking blueprint for all forms of misogyny. But instead of us kind of examining where our disquiet and where our ill feelings come from, and instead of exploring how misogyny hurts every single community, instead we want to take it out on people that we know are easier targets than ourselves. Because it's not like trans people have had it fucking easy all their lives. I do feel that with some trans women, not all of them, I do feel that some trans women do too fucking much. I do feel that there are trans women out there that are narcissistic, that will take their physical frustration out on cis women. But that's not because they're trans women. It's because they're narcissistic people. And at the end of the day, I've met enough trans people in my life to understand that most trans people, men and women, they just want to live their lives. The people who are trying to ice cisgendered people out, they are not the main majority of trans people. And not understanding the difference between that is exactly what's getting trans people killed. I said in one of my videos that, there's this mistaken belief that trans people have big state on their side, and I'm thinking, no, that's not the case. If anything, they're going to be one of the people who are the most vulnerable to this current culling we're undertaking right now. They're going to be the ones who are among the most victimized by this latest culling, by this latest depopulation effort. They're going to be among the ones on the front line being demonized. And I said it. And case in point, Brianna Ghey is able to be killed in broad daylight because we don't bother to explore the nuance. We're not interested in the truth. We're interested in being pandered to. We want to be pandered to and at the same time destroy the other side of the equation. Do you understand? Now, there are some trans folks that got some stuff to answer for too, because instead of understanding, well, some of them anyway, not all of them, like I said, tarring them all with the same brush is just not the move, okay? Now, there are some trans people who are, attempting to diminish and gaslight cisgendered people, and in particular cisgendered women, about our concerns. Now, I don't think that's cool either. I don't think it's cool for you to turn around and say, nobody's trying to erase you, because we all know that's not true. There is an erasure going on of cisgendered women, of our voices, of our freedom. It's just not trans people that are responsible for it. But there are people who used to be biological males that are playing a part in contributing to this sexism that we're experiencing. Because again, misogyny is pervasive everywhere. So instead of gaslighting cisgendered women about nobody's trying to take your space, understand that misogyny forms the entire crux of bigotry as a whole anyway. Understand that, learn it, and instead of trying to diminish the concerns of cisgendered women, actually try to understand things from our side. It's true. We are more privileged than you. But due to our being cis, we are more privileged than you. It's very, very true. But we are still marginalized in other ways. And when it comes to the lesbian and trans men community, even though we have heard from the lesbian community and we have heard from the trans men community and the trans non-binary community, I still don't feel like we hear enough of their side. I still don't feel like we hear enough of their side, and that's because trans men used to be biological females. And that's because lesbians and bisexual women and pansexual women, all females. Now, I get that the additional visibility means that they're probably less likely to be killed. We're probably less likely to be killed than trans women and gay men. We are probably less likely to be killed because the gay panic is minimized, but it still doesn't mean that we're out of the woods. We've been killed. We've been essayed. We've been odd. No, let me call it by its name. We've been sexually assaulted. We've been raped. And in fact, bisexual women are more likely to suffer from domestic violence than cisgendered ones. So, it does feel like lesbians are not having enough of a voice, and it does feel like trans men are not having enough of a voice either, because they're biological, because they either are biological females in the case of queer women, or they were biological females in the case of trans men or trans non-binary masculine. So I do feel like misogyny is pervasive throughout every community. So instead of gaslighting cisgendered women about it, and instead of gaslighting other trans people about it, because other trans people, both men and women, have spoken out about this, instead of gaslighting people who disagree, we need to come together and have a discussion about how we can move forward as how we can move forward united. You do not have to, as a community that's way more marginalized than us, trans people, you do not have to pander to us. You really don't. You don't owe us a goddamn thing. You really fucking don't. But at the same time, misogyny, as long as it's there and as long as it's present, it is always going to diminish the LGBTQ plus community. It is always going to diminish us for as long as the misogyny within our community is not recognized and not spoken about. At the same time, when the trans community are already so small and you are already facing disproportionate amounts of violence, sometimes there are times where criticism and just outright slurs can feel like the same thing. And it's no shade, because the thing is, when you go through that amount of pain, that amount of heartache, that amount of exclusion, discrimination, defamation of character, when you go through all of that, sometimes you just don't want to hear that you're not doing enough. You don't want to hear, I'm wrong too. Or sometimes you just don't want to hear that. Not when there are so many of you that are dying, and not so when there are so many of you that are going through violence. Hell, I've witnessed it myself. I had a trans non-binary friend that was feminine presenting, and the hatred that they used to get, I couldn't believe it. So I understand. I get it. When you're going through what you're going through, you don't want to fucking hear that you have work to do as well, because the work feels disproportionate. You're already out here fighting for your lives. You're already out here with your rights being rolled back, in more danger than you've ever been, arguably. So sometimes you just don't want to hear, that you have work to do as well, because it just feels disproportionate when you're marginalized. You mean to tell me on top of having to fight for my fucking life, I've got to think about other people as well? It's not fair. It's not fair. So I understand why the trans community do not want to hear criticism sometimes. I get it. But in order for us all to move forward together, some arguments have to be heard. At the same time, what worries me is that legitimate concerns about how sport, how it works in sports, legitimate concerns about how, how periods are talked about and how the reproductive system is talked about, legitimate concerns about that. What worries me is that those things are being used to legitimize transphobia rather than being used to have a wider conversation as to how to make the world fairer for everyone. And it's already happened. All these people who want to talk about, I'm a natural woman, and yet when it comes to trans women being killed, crickets. Nothing. And you know why that is? You know why they don't say anything? Because they know deep down that their hatred and their intellectual disingenuousness when it comes to discussing the discourse of trans people is what's getting trans people killed. They know. So why would they say anything? It doesn't take a fucking wizard to know that the more you discriminate against somebody, according to arbitrary differences or according to differences that really in the grand scheme of things don't fucking matter, when you fucking discriminate against somebody and when you demonize one group of people more than another group of people, then of course the demonized group of people are going to be more in danger than the ones who are not demonized. It doesn't take rocket science to recognize that. So us being led down this path of using the most narcissistic examples of an already demonized community in order to make our point, and using late stage capitalism, which fucking capitalizes on the LGBTQ plus community and panders to us rather than just giving us our fucking rights. All of this plays a part. And in allowing our ignorance to be dictated by that, all of that plays a part in why trans people are disproportionately likely to suffer from violence. Our refusal to own up to how mainstream media has fucked over the most marginalized people in society. In fact, not owning up to the marginalization to begin with, pretending that there isn't a fucking problem, is why these trans people out here are getting killed. Pretending like people have more important things to worry about than trans people. Pretending like that's the case is exactly what's getting trans people killed. Because maybe they do have more important things to worry about. But why think about important things that you feel are insurmountable when you can focus on things that you feel like are within your control? Why do you think trans people are having their rights rolled back? Why do you think they're taking the spotlight in terms of who we want to demonize and scapegoat? Because we feel like our economic situation is insurmountable. The fact that resources are increasingly finite, we feel is insurmountable. The energy crisis, we feel is insurmountable. The amount of strikes that are happening because our service workers or civil servants are not being paid enough, not nearly enough, feel insurmountable to us. And when all of these things feel insurmountable to us, we need a scapegoat. So let's not sit here and pretend like the ignorance that trans people have been met with are not directly responsible for the violence and the murders that have been committed against them. Let's not do that shit. Let's not. Again, as a cisgendered woman, I don't like being told what my womanhood is. I don't. But at the end of the day, it's misogyny. Misogyny permeates everything. It's misogyny that is erasing me. It is misogyny that is telling me who I am. It's misogyny that is responsible for the racism that I go through. It's misogyny that is responsible for the queer phobia, the fat phobia, all of that I go through, all of it down to misogyny. It has nothing to do with the group of people that are even more marginalized than I am. I'm sorry. And I know there are people who are narcissists out there who are, trying to take up space. But again, the majority of trans people are not trying to take up the space of women. They're not. They're simply not. And as for my own anger as a cisgendered woman, I know where it comes from. Again, if misogyny is permeating every community, then clearly misogyny is the problem, no? Clearly misogyny is the problem. Clearly the problem is not the trans community, and it never was the trans community. And us TIs, when it comes to trans people, we need to stop swallowing that fucking Kool-Aid too. We need to stop swallowing this idea that the trans community are, part of the beast and part of the devil, and they're seeking to bring us up. That's not the case. If anything, they're the most vulnerable, especially when they're TIs. We need to stop this. We really need to stop this. We need to stop looking for scapegoats. Focus on the actual issue. Human trafficking is becoming mainstream. Nobody is talking about the fact that the ethics and the codes of human trafficking and the militarization of human beings is becoming more mainstream at the same time that Havana syndrome and trafficking through the psychiatric profession is being exposed. Nobody is talking about that. And that's actually the most important thing there is to focus on. The amount of people that have already been murdered. Black, white, cis, trans, straight, gay, all of us, the amount of people that have been murdered through electromagnetic frequencies by non-ionized radiation. The amount of people that are having their differences used against them in counterintelligence measures. All of that has actually contributed to the bigotry, the rise in bigotry that we're seeing. Nobody is talking about it. It's contributed to the fact that our elderly are being killed off. Nobody is talking about that shit. Nobody is talking about what's really important. Maybe the important things wouldn't be so insurmountable if we weren't looking to be pandered or destroyed all the time. Nobody wants to focus on the truth because the truth doesn't pander to anybody. But it's the only thing that's going to get us out of the mess that we've landed ourselves in. Leave trans people the fuck alone. And stop fucking attaching them to pedophilia. Stop it. Just fucking stop. Just fucking stop. Rest in peace to Brianna Ghey. I'm sorry that she was subjected to this violence. And the unfortunate thing about this is that I know by no means has she been the only person in this country. She's just the only one that at this point that we know about. And I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for Brianna. I'm truly sorry for her family. And I'm truly sorry for any trans people that have been subjected to violence. I am truly sorry for any families of trans people that have been subjected to their loved one being murdered because they were trans and minding their business. I'm truly sorry. I am truly sorry. And I'm truly sorry that talking points that should be met with compassion and, and should be met with, an understanding of nuance. I'm sorry that these talking points are being used to justify violence and disrespect against you. I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. It's not right. It's not right. It really isn't right. I have the right to say how I feel as a woman, but not at the expense of people who are already so heavily discriminated against. Nobody has that right. I will always speak up for myself as a woman. I will always speak up for myself as a cis woman, but never at the expense of people who are already going through so much. I love you all. And now I'm going to go. Peace and blessings. Bye.